So he created a list of all the issues that were wrong with the guitar and thought, I'm going to make an electric guitar that fixes all these issues once and for all. In 1993, Ken Parker and Larry Fishman released the Parker Fly guitar. It's quite arguably one of the greatest guitars ever made, and it's definitely one of the most underrated guitars of all time. And because of that, I wanted to make a video to talk about the Parker Fly and why it's so unique and so great, who Ken Parker and Larry Fishman were, and why they decided to make the company to begin with, and what ended up happening with them. Why did they end up going out of business in 2016, I believe. And I was inspired by a lot of channels like Rick Beato, Philip McKnight, Rhett Scholl, a handful of other YouTubers that I started watching during COVID because, well, had a lot of time on my hands. But I wanted to make a video that made a claim like being a great guitar and that's underrated, and to discuss that from an objective standpoint. And I found that to be rather hard to do because, I set out to make this video 3 years ago, and here I am now in 2023, just now getting around to finishing it. So the challenge was, how could I make a claim or assertion about something that is so subjective as the guitar? Now, we all know, if you're a guitar player, that if somebody brought to you two options of guitars and said, here is the best guitar that was ever made, it fixes every single issue you've ever thought about, it sounds the best, it plays the best, it'll last a lifetime, but it looked really weird. And then here's a guitar that that you've always wanted, it's brand new, it's top of the line, you can have it for free. Most people are going to pick the guitar that they've always wanted. They're not going to pick the one that they never heard about that supposedly is the best guitar out there. And it's mainly because people like the way guitars look. They like a certain color, or maybe they're, biased and lean towards a certain brand. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that you need to change the way you go out and shop for guitars, or that after this video, this guitar is the one that you should go out and buy. In fact, I'm definitely not telling you that. If you are not familiar with Parker guitars and you're going out to spend a couple grand on a new guitar, don't buy a Parker Fly. I'll tell you that right now. Unless you're familiar with them and you know a lot about them and what to look for, if you're going to buy a new guitar, your first really nice guitar, go out and buy a Sir or a Kiesel or some, custom build Fender. When I say great, I'm talking about great in the same way you would call the very first guitar, the very first electric guitar great, the frying pan, or why the very first Telecaster or the Les Paul or the Stratocaster, why were those guitars so great? Because if I gave you the option again of the very first Telecaster versus a brand new top of the line Sir, and taking away the historical relevance of the Telecaster and the value, assuming that they were worth the same amount of money, you would definitely choose the Sir over the Telecaster. You would only choose the Telecaster if you knew the historical relevance and why it was probably worth $10 to $20 or $100,000 because it was the very first one. Hopefully you get my point. That's the lens that I'm kind of looking at this through when I say great. And when I say underrated, well, if you know anything about Parker, you'll kind of understand what I mean by that. But if not, later on I'll talk about the history and what happened with the company, and hopefully it'll make sense by the end. Assessing a guitar's greatness, or just anything that's subjective in nature, I guess, is very difficult. So I had to find a way to put together some metrics, I guess, that I could use that were comparative between other manufacturers and how they're made, and just, it was rather challenging, I'll put it that way. And when I finally got my hands on a Parker manual, because they don't typically come with these anymore, you have to hope you get one with your new guitar. I found a key sentence in there that really stood out to me, and it was when Ken talks about how his approach when designing the Parker guitars. To give you a little backstory about me, or a little bit about me, I guess, I am a low voltage systems engineer. I work in the architectural engineering and construction field, AEC. And so I work with other engineers, MEP engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, civil, to design buildings, stadiums, commercial buildings, schools, stadiums, athletic facilities, whatever, you name it. If an architect is designing it, the architect has to hire engineers to design the guts of the system or of the building and the structural foundation of it. And, so there's a lot of people involved when it comes to designing something or engineering or building something. in design and engineering, with what I do with designing audiovisual systems and acoustic stuff, or whether it's, you know, the MEP guy or mechanical guy designing an HVAC system, or even if it's a design engineer that works for Sony and making the new PlayStation or a new cell phone or a new car, whatever it may be, engineers and design engineers all follow a same basic principle that Ken Parker mentioned in his book, and that's form follows function, or form over function. It's a basic design principle that we all subconsciously think about and are considering when making decisions in the change of a design or when creating something new. And it's pretty much, you know, the function of it. Does it meet the functional requirements that are being requested by the owner or the client, the person requesting this item? And then the form is, you know, the looks of it, the shape of it, you know, which obviously come in second to the function. Or the function, I should say, takes precedent over the form. And that's the same thing with just about any design. The best way to design something is with a balance of form and function. That's the perfect way to do it. And that's what Ken Parker says he did in his approach to designing the Parker guitar. He says it right here in the book. And that is the same way that the second guitar was made, the Telecaster, first being the frying pan. So if you look back at the original steel string lap guitar, which was the frying pan, it was designed by Rickenbacker, and George Beecham. They pretty much had a concept or a theory that could we take mechanical string vibration, convert it to an electrical signal using magnetic pickups, and output that signal to an amplifier, which then amplifies it acoustically. Is that possible? How will it sound? Will it work? Let's try it. So they made something just to achieve that functional concept that they had in mind. Ergonomically, that's not a very comfortable guitar to play. It probably didn't sound very great. It was made out of metal. So they didn't care so much about the form. They didn't put as much thought and, you know, money into the design of the form, and partly because they didn't have anything before it to go by to know what needed to be changed. So therefore, form followed function in the design of the frying pan, which was revolutionary. It was a very unique new instrument that changed the way music production, or changed, you know, music going forward and how it's made and how it sounds. So then after the first guitar that was designed, which was form follows function, you had the Telecaster, which was more of a balance of form and function. And that's what made that guitar so great, is they had the basic principles of the function of the guitar down, but there were a few things that needed to be changed, like it kept going out of tune, or, you know, the intonation of the neck was a little different. So how could we maybe improve that a little bit? You know, the volume, it was either on or off. So how could we make that variable with the potentiometer? You know, so and ergonomically, they wanted something that fit, you know, in your lap. And so it had the leg carves in it, like most of your traditional wood instruments or stringed instruments have. So they made changes that didn't necessarily change the function of the guitar, but improved some of the functions, and at the same time changing the form to give it a more ergonomic design. So it was a balance, and so the Telecaster was very popular, not just because of the design engineering changes that were done, but also from a marketing standpoint. The Telecaster, it was called that because the original name, the Broadcaster, was copyrighted. I think it was like Gretsch or Gibson, I can't remember. So they had to change it to a no-caster for a while. Then they called it the Telecaster because televisions were new at the time. I think this was in the 30s. So the Telecaster was born. And so from a marketing standpoint, it was successful from that way as well. So after the Telecaster, though, they had the Les Paul, I think, came out after that. And so you had another company that said, well, I can improve the function of that guitar by changing a few things aesthetically with it, the shape of it, maybe adding a little bit more mass to the wooden body to give it more sustain and resonance or whatever he was trying to improve. And then a couple years later, you had the Fender Stratocaster, which is arguably one of the greatest guitars ever made in history. It's what every guitar nowadays is designed after. It's the basis. It's like the template that everybody uses when designing brand new Kiesels or Suhrs. They just make tiny modifications to improve certain aspects of the guitar, like neck stability or tuning stability or intonation, stuff like that. So since the Fender Stratocaster came out, I think it was like in '57, not much has changed since then. There hadn't been a big revolution in guitar manufacturing or a big change up until the Parker guitar came out in the 1993. So now some people will argue, well, there were a lot of unique guitars that came out in between then, but none that really approached the design with a balance of form and function like Ken did. And just like the Stratocaster and the Les Paul and the Telecaster before them, his guitar, his and Larry Fishman's guitar, the Parker Fly, fixed so many different functional issues of the guitar, revolutionized so many different ways in how we manufacture bridges and pickups and frets and the composites of the body. Nobody had ever made that drastic of a change in one fell swoop of a design in a single guitar release as Parker did with the Fly. Now, there were other manufacturers out around the 80s, the same time, in fact, actually a little earlier, like the Steinberger, the headless guitar that he created. He kind of had the same approach in a sense, whereas he was trying to fix some functional issues with the original guitars, which was mainly just weight. He wanted to find a way to make a guitar that plays and sounds like a guitar, but doesn't weigh 8 or 9 pounds like your Les Paul. So he designed that headless guitar, and I can't think of the model of it, but what he did is he used a composite resin to build the guitar. So it's not even actually a wood guitar. He strayed so far away from your traditional guitar manufacturing that it kind of is in a category of its own, if you ask me. There have been some other companies that have tried that since then. Switch, I believe, is one that they tried to use a composite resin to build the guitar. To me, they were heavier, honestly. The reason Steinberger was able to make it lighter is he just made the guitar so small. It was more of like a paddle than it was a guitar. But the reason he did the composite resin material, he could have done it out of wood, just using heavier woods and making a stronger neck joint. But the reason he made it out of composites was not to improve the functional any functional flaw of the previous versions of guitars. He did it to increase profitability in manufacturing, because it's cheaper to manufacture a mold and then just pour resin in it every time you want to make a guitar. It's very easy to manufacture a guitar like that. So he did it from a monetary standpoint, just to make his business profitable, which was successful. In fact, you might argue that it was maybe a little bit more successful than the Parker Fly. He had big name artists that played it. I know it was on like Cyndi Lauper's Time After Time video and a bunch of other guitars or videos from the 80s, because it, kind of fit that futuristic look that the 80s were all about. So there are other guitars that tried to make big changes in guitar manufacturing and design, but none nearly as much as Parker did with the Fly. So I want to add one note here about form and function, just to make that a little bit more clear. When I talk about form and function and design, specifically with a guitar, I'm not talking about just the overall shape of the guitar. I mean, that is the form of the body that was considered in the design, and that does have an impact on ergonomics and comfortability and aesthetics, which aesthetics are subjective, so we're not going to look at that. But ergonomics tend to be pretty objective. So yeah, it's not just the shape of the body, it's every single component, every little aspect and piece of the guitar. When you're changing it, you need to consider the form and function of that piece. So like the pickups, or I'm sorry, the frets. When designing the frets, what's the functional purpose of the frets? What are some of the drawbacks to the functionality of existing frets? What do we see that are wrong with existing frets? How could we change the form of that fret to improve the functionality? By changing that form, did we improve overall, or did we create more issues, or was it kind of a wash? Did we take away an issue but gained a benefit? Or I'm sorry, did we create an issue but took away an issue? Or did it just create a net benefit to the playability of the guitar? That's what they look at. That's what they should look at, I should say, when designing guitars. And that's how Ken approached it. He looked at, okay, how could I change the bridge to be maybe a little bit more ergonomic, more comfortable, more stable, whatever it may be, without hurting the basic, you know, functionality that we're familiar with, and, you know, without completely reinventing the wheel. And so the changes that were made there had a balance of form and function. He changed the form to improve functional flaws of the existing bridge designs that were out there, but didn't create new issues, I should say. Well, I can't completely say that. I'll get into that later. But for instance, on the Steinberger, the headless guitar, you know, he changed obviously the form of the body of the guitar as a whole, along with the bridge and other items. He created that new trans trim thing that he said, which was essentially, I believe it was a floating trim system, but it had this transpose switch that you can flip, and your guitar tunes like a step down or a half step down in just a flip of a switch, and everything stays in tune. Did it fix an issue, or did it just add a functional thing that, you know, was unique? And I don't think it fixed any issues. One could argue that. But what it did do is, even if, let's say, it did fix an issue, it created another issue in that, because of the design of the headless guitar that he made and that trans trim system, you had to use proprietary strings. So you had to get strings that had dual ball ends on it. They were strings specifically made for the Steinberger trans trim guitars. And so therefore, if you went to a guitar store that did not have those in stock and you busted your E string, well, you don't have a way to replace it. You're going to have to, you know, find a way to rig one together, or, you know, wait until you find one in stock somewhere. So sure, it maybe created a new functional, added functionality to the bridge, but it created an additional issue. So therefore, there wasn't a net gain in the change. There wasn't a loss though either. It's just kind of a wash in a sense, depending on who you are and how you view that. If you're from a small town that doesn't have a lot of guitar stores, you probably saw that as a loss because you couldn't get guitar strings. If you're from a big city, you probably saw that as a gain because now you have a bridge that you can, you know, transpose the strings all in one switch. So hopefully that makes sense as to what I mean when I say a balance of form and function. Ken approached it. He approached every aspect, redesigned every piece of the guitar except for maybe the tuners, in a way to increase functionality by changing the form without creating new issues. Now, he couldn't do it completely, you know, he couldn't make as many changes as he did without creating a couple small issues, which I'll get into, but the issues that he created they were negligible. It wasn't that big of a deal. I'll put it that way. Okay, so Ken Parker started off as a furniture maker. He, I guess, originally studied furniture making, but kind of dabbled in guitar making at the same time. And he was actually studying archtop guitar making before he did the electric guitar. And that's actually what he's doing now. You know, since he sold the Parker company, the Parker Guitar Company, he's gone back to his roots and has started making archtop guitars again. They're beautiful guitars. You can find them at, I believe it's kenparkerarchtops.com. And if you have, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 burning a hole in your wallet, then that's a good place to invest it. Because obviously guitars and gold are always a good investment if you know what guitars to invest in. That's one of them. So he currently is making archtop guitars, but during the time he was studying furniture making, he was working at a guitar shop as a tech in, I think it was New York. And he had the opportunity to meet a lot of professional players that would come in to have their guitars repaired. And through conversations, he was able to get a better understanding of things that they did not like about the guitar. And then just from working on the guitars, he was able to see trends and common issues, like I'm constantly having to refret these guitars, or it's always the, you know, this fret and this fret that wears out faster, whatever it was. You know, he you know, started to make a list of this stuff and think of ways to do it better, just like a lot of engineers' mindsets are, is like there's got to be a better way, a faster way to make this happen. And that's kind of how he looked at that when he was repairing guitars and talking to people. So he created a list of all the issues that were wrong with the guitar and thought, you know, I'm going to make an electric guitar that fixes all these issues once and for all. He wasn't looking to make a guitar company like Fender or Sir, Kiesel, or any of these companies. He wanted to make a guitar that just revolutionized guitars and fixed all the issues. And then go from there. You know, he's a tool maker, as he said. He's not a businessman. He's far from it. In many conversations that I've seen of his interviews and stuff like that, and just from my short time talking with him on the phone, he does not like the man. You know, he's not a big corporate guy. You know, he likes to make tools. He wants to make something and then let somebody that knows how to use it, and sit back and just smile and watch them be happy playing it. That's what his goal is, which is that's what we want in a guitar manufacturer. Anybody that's making anything, is we want somebody that's passionate about the design and what they're doing, and that's Ken Parker. That's another reason why I think this guitar is truly a great guitar. So he brought on Larry Fishman, who is a mechanical engineer, to design the electrical system and the mechanics of the bridge, the tremolo system, and the piezo active acoustic pickups and stuff like that. So between Larry and him, they were able to design the complete Parker Fly guitar. Now Ken also used knowledge that he gained from friends that did speedboat racing to find a way to introduce composites into the manufacturing process. And in speedboats, they're made out of wood, but they have carbon fiber exoskeletons to give it a little bit more rigid and a more stable structure that won't break apart if it hits a rock or something. And so Ken saw a way to utilize that same technology in just a slightly modified way to make the guitar more stable. And I'll kind of get in all those little pieces a little bit more down the road, but that's kind of what led to the design of the Parker guitar. Is Ken just he was working in it and saw a way to make it better, and actually went out and made it happen. So it took about 10 years of design, and they made multiple iterations of the Parker Fly guitar. It was actually originally supposed to be a lot thinner than this guitar, which is already pretty thin. His original concept was to take an archtop acoustic guitar and to just pretty much take the face of the archtop off and get rid of the sides and the back, and make it a little thicker, obviously, for stability, and then that would be the Fly. And he did kind of make that, and he has a concept called the potato chip, I think is what it's called. There's videos of it out there. But it's so thin, even the 1/4-inch jack instrument cable sticks out of the top and the bottom of the guitar because it's thinner than the input jack for the cable, or the output jack. So, that was his original design. But of course, like any company, he had to have funding, and so Korg, the company that makes like the Triton piano and stuff, helped fund Parker guitars and get them started, and help them, get the manufacturing plant put together and all that stuff. And whenever you get the man involved or business involved, they're going to have a say in how things are done. So they ended up changing and adding, they wanted to make it thicker so that you can add standard electromagnetic pickups, and which required a thicker body. So that's where they ended up with this final design here of the Parker Fly, which to me is still a beautiful design. That's subjective, not arguing it, but it is a beautiful guitar if you ask me, especially the back. I mean, that's pretty if you ask me. So they released the first Parker Fly in 1993 to the general public. It was not really well received, primarily because of the way it looks and because of all the things that Ken Parker said that this guitar was going to fix, primarily the lightweight, like Ned Steinberger was after. People didn't believe that this guitar, if it was truly made out of wood like he was saying it was made out of, there's no way it could be this thin and have steel strings attached to it pulling down on the neck and not snap the neck in half right here at the joint where it meets the body. And he tried to explain the exoskeleton, the carbon fiber exoskeleton, stuff like that, but people just weren't having it. They either believed that the whole guitar was made out of composites and weren't a fan of that. They wanted traditional guitars out of wood, or just that it's not going to last and it's going to break. So there were a few artists that picked up the guitar, like you had some newer, like Killswitch Engage, or newer, CKY, 9 Inch Nails. You had David Bowie and Adrian Belew. Eddie Van Halen was a big Parker guitar fan. He just had his Frankenstein guitar that he played on stage, but he did play a Parker on stage a couple times as well. you know, there were a lot of Joni Mitchell. You know, she was a big proponent. She just recently played one in her last concert like a year or two ago. So there was some buy-in from big name artists, which is what you need if you're going to make a guitar company. You need to be able to get some big names to play it so that you can sell more. And you know, but you had other guys like Keith Richards, Rolling Stones, who looked at it and said, well, it's a great guitar, it plays great, but why does it have to look like a freaking machine gun, you know? And so they just weren't a fan of the design of it. And I think that's kind of really what hurt the company. But Korg, you know, having funding from Korg didn't help either, because, well, if you have somebody funding you, that you want to make sure that you're turning a profit for them. That's all they care about. They don't care about making a tool for an instrument or for guitar players. They care about making a profit. That's why they invested in you. And one of the things Ken has said multiple times in his interviews since owning the Parker Guitar Company is that they were making $10,000 guitars and selling them for $2,000. Now, if he said that when he was trying to pitch the business to Korg, they would have immediately said no, obviously, because you're not going to make a profit if you're losing $8,000 on every guitar. Now, granted, that number is probably based off of if you were to just make one-off Parker flies every time from a small little facility, then it would probably cost around $10,000 in labor and custom parts and pieces. The only way you can make money in a guitar, like especially custom guitars like this, mass-produced ones, is to sell as many as possible, bulk sales, which requires professional players to play them and to, you know, advertise them and stuff like that. And because they didn't get that so much, they weren't able to sell the mass quantities that they were hoping to turn a profit. So they ended up having to make changes to the lineup, I guess you can say. They made a few variations of the Parker Fly guitar, like the Deluxe and the Classic. But mainly they created a line of bolt-on traditional Strat style guitars like the Nightfly to make something that was a little less, or a little bit more cost efficient to manufacture, I should say, and that they can make a little bit more margin on when they sell it. And even that wasn't enough, so they ended up having to go to outsourcing, essentially design and manufacturing. And this is where when I got to talk to Ken on the phone, he said that this is one of the things that really he believes hurt the company and caused him to sell, and he's not a fan of them at all. But they created a line of guitars called the P Series, which is this Fender Strat style looking one I have here in the Telecaster style. That P38 was my very first Parker. It was made during the time Ken owned the company, and what they did is they hired a company in Korea to design a line of guitars called the P Series and manufacture them over there, then ship them, because it's cheaper, obviously, to manufacture overseas, like in Indonesia and Korea and China. So they did that as more of a money grab because he was kind of forced to, in a sense. He did not want to do it. He did not like it, but they did it, and they made some okay guitars. I mean, my P38 I've had for 20 years, and it's still a great guitar. I've had to rebuild it completely because it's made like a traditional guitar, but it's still a fun, you know, guitar and is unique in its own way. But they didn't really help, I guess you can say, so much. So the company ended up going out of business. Well, they didn't go out of business. Ken Parker and Larry Fishman sold to USM. I think Korg backed out a couple of years prior or whatnot, but they ended up selling Parker guitars to US Music Corporation, who made, I think, like Washburn guitars and stuff, or sold those primarily. And when USM took over, Ken has said multiple times in interviews that, you know, he completely washed his hands and walked away. He had zero input on any guitar that was manufactured after 2003. So like this Telecaster style, that was a 2007. He did not design that, have any input in that. That was completely USM's idea to release that guitar, and it was made by probably a design team in Korea or Indonesia. The Parker Fly series, this series here, then came out with what's called the Refined series of guitars. They didn't advertise it that way. Well, I guess they kind of did. They did say it was a refined model. I don't think they anticipated that name to that label to be adhered to just post 2003 model guitars and the pre 2003s to be called pre-refined era. But essentially, if you ever look at Parker guitars, you'll see that term pre-refined or refined. And all that's referring to is that U.S. Music Corporation took over the company in 2003, moved the manufacturing process to another location, and refined how the guitar was manufactured. They found a more cost-efficient way to manufacture it. That's not to say that they made a better way, more efficient production line. That's part of it. But what they also did is they found a way to use cheaper components. The easiest way to tell if you have a pre-refined era Parker Fly, which are more sought after, and they're the ones that Ken Parker designed, is it'll have this wheel. And that was to make it easier to adjust the tremolo and to change setups on the guitar pretty easy without using a tool. But USM said, well, that's not really necessary. We don't need that. So let's get rid of that. Let's change a couple other things. The layout of the knobs, reduce the number. I mean, they just found a way to produce the guitar in a more cost-efficient manner so that it wasn't a $10,000 guitar being sold for $2,000. It was a $2,000 guitar being sold for closer to $3,000 at this point. So the refined era, I'll kind of go on a little tangent here. The refined era, pre-refined era is kind of a hot topic if you are a Parker enthusiast. I'm not going to get into the argument as to what makes one better than the other. From the reason I'm making this video, the argument that I'm making and the reasoning I said earlier on about form and function and the design and what makes a guitar great, I consider the pre-refined, the very first versions of the pre-refined, to be the great guitars. The refined version, the U.S. Music Corporation guitars, are still great guitars in that they are very nice playing guitars, consistent. But because of the changes that were made, they were made to really just reduce cost. They took away functionality, didn't fix really anything other than just to make the guitar more cost efficient to manufacture. But from a player standpoint, it really didn't improve anything. Now, they might have changed the pickups on some, I don't know. Some people argue that they sound better. I think that's subjective personally. But, the changes that Ken made when he first released it were all new. And therefore, just like when the first Telecaster, the Stratocaster came out, it was new, and that made it great. The iterations that came forth after the first Stratocaster came out, the thousands of them that have been made, those aren't as great as the original Stratocaster. Now, they might be better guitars as far as how they're played and the quality, but again, from my argument, the lens that I'm looking at this through, they're not great in that aspect. So therefore, the refined era guitars, I'm not going to put in the same category as the pre-refined. They're not as revolutionary and as great as this guitar. Hope that makes sense. Don't be offended. I'm not trying to say your guitar is worse than a pre-refined era. So after they sold the company to U.S. Music Corporation, U.S. Music Corporation obviously made a ton of different variations. They refined the manufacturing process to Fly. They created a ton of new lines of guitars. They changed the aesthetics of the headstock because people didn't like that you couldn't hang this on a wall hanging, wall hanger or whatever. So they added like a little lip to the headstock so that you can actually hang it on a wall hanger. I mean, little things like that just to appease people, but didn't actually add any functionality improvements to the guitar, in my opinion. And then again, like I said, they created a whole ton of new lines of guitars, really like a Dragonfly and a PDF, and which I'm not getting into whether or not those are great or good guitars. I'm just saying that's what they did, and they did it to make more money. So fast forward, USM was bought out by Jam Industries, I think in 2009, and then in 2016, I believe, is when Parker Guitar or Jam Industries went out of business. They filed bankruptcy, so therefore Parker Guitars ceased to exist. So they no longer make Parker guitars as of 2016, I believe. And because of that, the value of the Parker Fly guitars are going up. And part of that is specifically with the pre-refined era guitars is because the pre-refines, again, were made exactly how Ken designed. He had an idea, a concept, and he had the way it should be designed down to the amount of glue for each fret. And it needed to be done that way. His whole concept was that, other than fixing all the issues, is he also wanted to fix the inconsistencies in manufacturing with guitars. Now, one of the things that I've seen on many videos, YouTubers like Rhett Scholl and Rick Beato and all those guys, when they talk about guitar shopping, there's a common thing that they've mentioned that I find to be a little ridiculous, but it's necessary. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I just think it's ridiculous that we have to do this. Is if they're shopping for a high-end guitar, like say a new Telecaster custom shop or whatever, I don't know, just a brand new Telecaster. Well, of course, Fender makes thousands of models of that exact same guitar, or thousands of those exact same models. So they'll go to the shop and they'll play 10 of those exact same model guitars until they find the one that has the mojo, or the just that feel like it was just, oh, this is the one that was built right. Because the other ones, there was a flaw here, and maybe there's something wrong here, or I don't like this, because there's so many inconsistencies in how the guitars are made. Part of that is because you're dealing with organic, materials like wood, and it's hard to have a consistent build on a guitar. But Ken said, well, no, we can actually still make a guitar out of wood and have it, consistently manufactured to where if you pick up a guitar that was made in '95 and has been in California its whole life versus one that's been up in Maine and was bought in '93 and it's been traveling around the world, that if you were blindfolded and put them in your lap and played them, and they were set up the same, nines and all that stuff, that you would not be able to tell the difference. That they would sound the same, they would feel the same, there would be no issue in the difference of it. And he actually succeeded in that to a point that it almost is considered a flaw. I've heard many guitar players or people that have talked about the Parker guitars as, just briefly, that they're very vanilla, I guess you can say. They're all the same. There's nothing unique about them, And that's exactly what he set out to do. He wanted a guitar that played and sounded exactly the same and consistent in its design. That's a very, very, very hard thing to do from a manufacturing standpoint. That takes a high-end, high-quality QC department to really micromanage every detail of the guitar before it leaves the line. It has to be signed off, and that costs more money because you're bringing on a bigger quality control team. So everything that Ken did, he did to better the overall end product, but he did it without considering the business side of things, which is what ended up biting him in the butt down the road. But I'm happy he did it. I think that the guitars that he made between 1993 and 2003, that if you were able to get one when they first came out, congratulations, you probably got a really good deal on it. Or ones, I guess, before the big boom in these. Some of these were selling for, I heard, as low as like $1,000 to $1,500 in great condition, perfect condition almost. So if you're able to get one of those, congratulations, because these things are skyrocketing in price. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people at the time didn't believe what Ken was saying about them being, let me put it this way. He said that it was going to be stable, the neck wouldn't warp, that the frets would last forever, the hardware would last forever, that this guitar is really, you buy one and it's going to last forever with little maintenance on it. People didn't believe that. They truly thought the neck was going to snap if it was made out of wood. That if it was really made out of the basswood and poplar, as this one's made, or this is a mahogany and poplar, but if the neck was really made out of poplar, as he's saying, and it's not bolt-on, that there's no way that this neck's going to stay straight if you take it from a hot environment to a cold environment. It's going to warp. And so people didn't believe him. But now, fast forward 30 years, I mean, this guitar is I think it's a 97, so it's almost 30 years old, and it plays and feels like it's brand new. The truss rod has never been adjusted. Yeah, I mean, I've adjusted the height of the bridge just for fun, because I like action at a certain height, but the frets look like they're brand new. This thing plays and sounds like it's brand new. All of my Parker Flies, I can't tell you the difference between them. If I was blindfolded, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one I'm playing. And that's pretty impressive, being that one's made in 95, one made in 97, the other one's made in 2001. So you can't say that about any other guitar manufacturer out there. That is a very, very cool, I guess, thing about the Parker guitars. Okay, so what is it that Ken and Larry actually did to this guitar that made it so unique? Like, what were the changes? And that's what I kind of want to go over now. So I'm going to start from pretty much the top down and relate it to the list of flaws that Ken had taken note of during the time he was working on guitars and talking to professional musicians. So I'll discuss the part, what's unique about it, and what did it fix, or if it created a new issue, because there are a couple little pieces that you might say created new issues. But again, the objective here was to create or to prove that a guitar was created that fixed more issues than any other guitar has done since the Stratocaster, without creating, too many new issues. So there had to be a net gain. So the headstock, so let's start with the design first of all. That's one of the first things that pops out, and that covers pretty much the whole body here. So when it comes to the design of the guitar, obviously that's could be looked at from a subjective standpoint as to whether or not it looks good or not. And obviously I'm not here to tell you whether this looks good or not. I'll leave that for you to decide. What I will tell you though is that there needed to be purpose for it. So for instance, starting with the headstock here, the reason the head looks like this here, from a memorial standpoint, I guess, or historical relevance, it looks like a lute. And Ken designed, he as a classical guitar maker like Archtop, he knows a lot about old guitars, and the lute, if you don't know, was like one of the very first guitars, I guess you can say, of like the Baroque period. Now there's tons of different variations of the lute and how the size and the number of strings, and there's not really a standard lute. But if you look at how a typical lute is designed, the headstock, the neck comes up and then the headstock comes out straight, like at a 90-degree angle. If you look at that from an angle, it actually looks like this headstock here. So from a historical standpoint, it resembles the lute. So there's a purpose on that reason. From a functional standpoint, how to put this in a way that I understand it, Ken talked about how it takes the headstock out of play when it comes to sustain and resonance of the vibrations throughout the guitar. So essentially when you pluck a guitar or a guitar string, the body is resonating at that frequency, and it's like if you drop a pebble in water and those waves spread out. So it starts out here and it kind of comes out. The more walls that it hits, it starts to reflect. The waves start to reflect. This is the same thing in acoustics. You get stuff called like standing waves, or you get waves that are out of phase or cancel each other out. And that's how on a guitar, what ends up happening, the way you hear that, is you get like ghost notes or wolf tones, as they call it. So by making the head shape this, or by making the headstock this shape and as skinny as it is, it takes it out of play when it comes to an acoustic standpoint or the sound waves. They don't. There's less standing waves or probability of phase cancellation in the waves. Again, I'm not a luthier. I would suggest reading a little bit more about why he designed the headstock like this, but there is a functional purpose for it, so that it affects the tone of the wood or of the guitar. And then as you come down to the body, obviously the neck's the neck. There's nothing unique there. I'm not going to get into radius of the necks and stuff, and if it's conical or not, because it doesn't really alter the playability of it. That's subjective to your hand, and whether you like the small thin neck or the fatter neck. So I'm not going to get into that. The design though down here, obviously, for the most part, it's pretty traditional in the bottom, but you have the two horns here. This horn obviously keeps continuity in the design between the headstock, but what it also does is by extending it out as far as it has to here and having the strap anchor point right there, it makes the strap balance if you're standing up and playing. He wanted the guitar to be balanced so that it wouldn't like fall over, or if you let go of the guitar, it kind of falls up into your head. So to get that balancing point to where the center, the mass is centered, I guess, when it's hanging, that he had to extend this arm out. And you'll see this in, I've actually seen an attachment for the Ned Steinberger's headless guitar where somebody created this like little attachment that bolts on, and it gives it an arm very similar to the design of the Fly, so that when you have it in a standing position strapped up, that it doesn't fall down or swing back up in your face. So it's a more balanced guitar at that standpoint, and that was another thing that Ken wanted to fix from other guitar players. Now the body is, like, again, it's pretty traditional. This is just for continuity in the design, the flow of the design. It kind of makes sense. You'll notice there's a lip here on the edge, and like I mentioned earlier, the Parker Fly was originally supposed to be the face of an archtop guitar just taken off. And if you've ever seen an archtop guitar, it curves in the top, it kind of raises in the top, and then it kind of curves down, and then it lips up on the edges, and that's called the surround. It's similar to a speaker or like a subwoofer. It curves and it has this surround on the edge. And in archtop manufacturing, what that surround does, that little extra bit of lip there produces a lower frequency when the face of the archtop resonates. If you didn't have that lip, you wouldn't get as much low end on it. And that's something that Ken Parker's new archtops are known for, is to have a really full low end sound out of an archtop, which is typically really hard to achieve. From a functionality standpoint, it doesn't affect the tone at all on a solid body guitar. It's mainly just for looks and to resemble the archtop guitar. It's kind of a shout out. From an ergonomic standpoint, though, what it does is it makes the guitar more comfortable, because the guitar is so thin that if it was this thin all the way through, that sitting on your leg would not feel very good. It kind of digs into your leg. So by adding that surround lip, it not only gives it a shout out to the archtop, but it makes this side a lot thicker. So you have a lot more mass, and it spreads out the weight and disperses it over your leg a little bit more, so it's a lot more comfortable. You don't get that pain in the leg from the guitar sitting on it. Plus, it's so lightweight anyway that that's not really an issue to begin with. So the design of the lip, the horns, all makes sense. There's a practical, functional reason for it from a balance, acoustic standpoint, and ergonomic standpoint, but also historical relevance in referencing the lute and referencing archtop guitars, as the original guitar maker, Ken Parker, was known to make and still makes. So the back of the guitar, not much to it. The one unique thing about this is that it's carved out. So it kind of has, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on here, but it kind of has like a dip in the middle here. And that's for, again, ergonomics and comfortability, so that your dad bod can really it can fit right up against you and feel comfortable. The guitar is carved in a way that it's, again, balanced without having a strap on, so that if you just have it in your lap, it just wants to sit here at this 45-degree angle and not like raise or drop down on you. So that was another thing that people requested, is a balanced guitar. So that kind of covers the overall form of the guitar. And one of the things that are most notable that you first see when you look at this guitar is the design of it. Again, that's not subjective. That is an objective view at why this guitar is shaped the way it is and the purpose behind it. There actually is a purpose and relevance to it from an ergonomic standpoint and historical relevance. Just like the Fender Strat, it was shaped the way it was with the curved edges for an ergonomic standpoint. It was shaped with the figure 8 pattern, just like traditional stringed instruments that have the leg carve out for ergonomics. So there was purpose behind the change. Other than that, on the headstock, when it comes down to the tuners, this is really the only thing about this guitar that was not made custom for the Parker guitar. These are Spurzell or Spurzell locking tuners. Spurzell were making these tuners, I think, a few years prior to the Parker Fly's release. I do believe that this was one of the very first guitars to ever include locking tuners factory out of the box. So it was unique in that standpoint, but there was, you could buy these and add these to a guitar back in '93. They're just a lot more costly than your standard, non-locking tuners. The nut, standard graphite nut, it's pretty typical nowadays in most of your high-end guitars. You don't have to worry about it wearing down as much. It will wear down. In fact, I have one of my guitars, the G string has cut itself into it after the last 20 years. That it gives you that little sitar sound where it vibrates when you play an open G. Again, that's pretty typical, but it doesn't happen as early as your non-graphite nuts. And most guitar manufacturers this day will tell you that graphite's probably the best way to go. As far as tonal qualities, Ken studied every type of nut possible, like ostrich bone and all these different types of bone nuts, and then graphite, plastic, you name it. He tried it out, and he has a funny little saying. I think I read in one of his interviews, I might have this wrong, but it's something along the lines of changing the nut on the guitar is like a girl changing her fingernail color polish or fingernail polish color and thinking guys will find her more attractive now. It's like it really doesn't do anything is kind of what he was getting at. The frets. This was one of the coolest things, or the frets on this guitar. So this was not the first guitar to have stainless steel frets, but it is the very first guitar to use this type of hardened stainless steel. So you typically don't see hardened stainless steel used in fret manufacturing because standard frets are designed in a very intricately. They're shaped like a T, and that requires the manufacturing press, the company that makes the fret wire, to have these special tools that can shape that metal to a certain form and add the little teeth, or the tangs as they call it. Now, if you were to use hardened steel to make your standard stainless steel frets, the machines that press that steel would wear out quicker more over time, so therefore production costs go up because you're going to have to replace the equipment in the production line. It's one thing to make a wire hard, but it's another thing to shape a wire into the shape of a T with teeth on it and tangs. So therefore, most companies, almost every single company that makes stainless steel frets, do not use hardened stainless steel because of that reason. So it's just not practical. And plus, stainless steel, for the most part, will last you a long time. Not as long as hardened, but it will last a long time. Now, the cool thing about these is these are more of just a standard wire that Ken Parker used. One of the issues that were big that he was told from pro players and that he saw was neck warping over time from the changes of environment. If you own a wood guitar or any wood instrument, if you know that you take it from a hot environment or a cold environment to a humid environment, that the neck will warp, and you'll get what's called like relief, where the guitar's neck will bend this way, or it'll do this, it'll back bow. That's a bad thing. You don't want this to happen. If it's relief, you can typically fix it. And this is actually the fretboard of a Parker Fly guitar. But what he did is, like I mentioned earlier, he used composite material, an exoskeleton, to stabilize the wood to where it wouldn't, deform over time. And when he first released the Parker guitars, the Parker Fly, he didn't even put a truss rod in it because it wasn't needed. He only added the truss rod in a lot of these, which is more of a wire than anything. It's called piano wire. He only added that because people didn't want to buy a guitar without a truss rod, especially a guitar that supposedly had a wood neck. If it was wood like he was saying, there's no way you can't have a truss rod. It's going to warp over time. And he tried to tell people that, no, the exoskeleton that we put on here is so sturdy and rigid, it's not going to warp. But he had to add it anyway. So that was another marketing thing that the man made him do. So essentially, the poplar neck that's on this guitar has a composite made out of epoxy, fiberglass, and carbon. And that's the composite that he created for this. And that's a shell that covers the entire back of the guitar. And it's about the thickness of this. It's about paper thin, like a business card thick. And that covers the entire back of the body all the way to the edge. And then it goes up to the headstock and wraps the headstock completely. On the back of the neck, there is like a half-inch or quarter-inch strip of straight, pure carbon fiber, because that's even more rigid and durable. And the neck is the part that you want to stay straight as long as possible. Now, he used to use a full-width strip of carbon fiber, but realized that when they started adding the truss rod in, that if somebody did adjust the truss rod was too weak and it would snap, and because this neck was too rigid. So they actually made it a little less of a width of carbon fiber so that you can actually adjust the relief if you wanted to on this guitar, although you should never have to. So the neck has that exoskeleton across the back for stability, but then also they added this that same composite material, just more refined and polished. They added that composite to the fretboard to add even an additional layer of stability, so that pretty much the wood is completely encased in an exoskeleton, but it's still wood, so therefore the resonance and the sound waves can transfer through the neck just like a traditional guitar. It doesn't take away from the tonal qualities of a wood guitar, but gives it the stability that you want out of a guitar. So this was the very first guitar to combine composite material with wood. You see that all the time now. Kiesel, if you go through their factory, they're using, I don't know if they still do or not, but for a while they were putting 2 carbon fiber rods on either side of the truss rod within the wood to keep the neck more stable. Other companies are using composites and stuff as well, but Ken Parker and Larry Fishman were the very first to do that, to incorporate that. But you're seeing it all the time now. So the fretboard, because it's the same material, which is, you know, the thickness of a business card, they couldn't use traditional frets with tangs, because if you were to, you know, if you know about installing frets, you have to typically carve a slot in the wooden neck and then hammer the frets in there, because the tangs are the teeth that grip onto the wood so that they don't pull out, plus a little bit of glue. Well, if you were to put this fretboard on and cut the frets into it, you're essentially just cutting this fretboard into little pieces. Therefore, you're compromising the structural integrity that this is supposed to provide to the neck, and it would defeat the purpose. You would really only have this just for the looks and the feel of the frets of the of that smooth fret. Or yeah. So by doing this type of fretboard that Ken Parker used, he couldn't use the traditional frets. He had to use a fret wire. So the frets are more of like, it's like a wire, but it has one flat end, and the flat end has like 2 curves on it to provide more surface area for the glue, the special glue that they made, to adhere to the fret and the fretboard. If it was just a single flat piece, there'd be less surface area, so there's more probability that it could rip off. So even those little curves were, you know, details that were thought of to increase the stability of the glue to where the frets wouldn't peel off. So because of that shape, though, of the fret, they were able to use hardened stainless steel, because it's essentially just a wire. So it was very easy for the fret manufacturer to just pump out a straight, you know, hardened wire of stainless steel with one flat end. That's an easy shape to make. That's an easy shape to make versus adding tangs to it. So because of the design of the fretboard and the need of the tangless frets, he was able to use a hardened stainless steel. Therefore, the frets will last forever. All these frets on every one of the guitars look like they've never been touched. There's not a scratch or dent on a single one. They're pretty much impervious to any kind of wear and tear from playing. So therefore, you get a long-lasting fret and less fret jobs and fret repairs that need to be done, which is another thing people complained about and things that he saw that he was constantly having to take care of with guitars. So also, because of the composite material in the fretboard, it's like glass. If you typically, if you play a standard wood guitar with, say, like a rosewood or a ivory fretboard, if your fingers start to sweat, it'll get a little tacky and sticky. But on these, it's like as your fingers sweat, it's like adding oil or lubricant, and it just makes it even easier to play. The frets are pretty low. They're pretty small frets. They're not jumbos or anything like that. So it makes the guitar feel like it's got super fast action. It's one of the easiest guitars to play. In fact, one of the advertisements for the guitar would say that it plays itself. And a lot of pro players would say that the guitar feels like it just plays itself. It's so easy. So that covers pretty much the neck down. That takes care of the fretboard. The truss system in it, which, like I mentioned, is a truss wire. It's a smaller diameter than your typical. I do have a one I can kind of show you. I have a carved up fly here, and you can see kind of how the truss rod is embedded into the neck, and how it's actually, you can actually pull it out and bend it. It's, you know, kind of neat, but you should never have to use it. So as you work your way down, we've already kind of talked about the body. We got the head, the neck, the pickups. These are DiMarzio pickups, but they're custom-made DiMarzio pickups specifically for the Parker Fly because of the way they attach to the body. So because the body's so thin, you couldn't carve in the traditional cavity there that was needed, a deep enough one for, you know, mounting posts that a typical magnetic pickup would use. So they made these thinner pickups by DiMarzio and made these screw holes here. Each of the posts, these two here, they're actually Allen keys that you can adjust the height or remove the pickups. So but they sound great. They did, so this is a Gen 1 DiMarzio system. So I don't know when, it's probably like in the late 90s. This is a 97 here. My 95 and 97 have Gen 1 DiMarzios. My 2001, the mahogany one there, that one has Gen 2 DiMarzio pickups. You can tell by the size of the logo on them, but definitely a lot fuller sound. One of the complaints about the Parker Fly guitar was that the pickups just were a little too dull. Like it was, maybe, I guess it was a little too bassy is how I'd put it. It wasn't as flat from top to bottom. If I played a power chord with distortion and tried to pluck, you know, my D and G string or something, you wouldn't really hear them. It'd kind of get mushed in, whereas the Gen 2s, it's a lot clearer. So they did make little changes like that over time. During the time that Ken Parker owned the company, he did kind of refine the guitar in a sense, but mainly to improve his own design. Things that he saw were flaws with the guitar, like the smaller strip of carbon fiber, the little bit better pickups, because he agreed that it was kind of needed. So then you get down to the bridge. This is where it really gets different. So one of the cool things about the Parker Fly was it had 12 patents on it, like for using composites with wood, the shape of the guitar. It was the very first guitar to use this type of stainless steel fret, the glue-on stainless steel. It was the very first guitar to ever have active piezo pickups in it with electric magnetic pickups. So there had been piezo pickups before, but never combined in an electric guitar before. So Larry Fishman actually makes most of the active piezo pickups that you see in any other guitar to this day. He has his own line of bridges, which you see on that P38 down there. It's kind of like it's a Fishman bridge, but it's like a Wilkinson style bridge, if you're familiar. I think Graph Tech or Ghost, I can't remember. A couple companies make them like that, but Fishman is the best at it. He's been doing it since the 80s. So this bridge, though, this was a custom molded, like it's called hot wax removal mold, cast aluminum mold. And what that means is, so there's a lot of materials in guitars or other companies that make where they mold the metal to the shape that it's needed. But the way it's typically done, if you've ever taken a metals class, is you create a mold, and by hammering this sand down and compacting it, then you take the solid piece out and you have this empty cavity, and you know, put the two pieces together and pour the mold in. The problem with that is that as you put together the two halves of the mold, sometimes it falls apart, the sand breaks, or it's just not as accurate. Hot wax removal mold is what's typically used in jewelry manufacturing, because you need really precise molds. Very fine detail. So what they do is they make a wax mold of the bridge. They make the enclosure for the metal to be poured into. They form that around the wax and leave the wax in there, so that when you pour the hot metal in, the wax is melted away, is eliminated, and the hot metal fills the void, and thus giving you smoother edges because the wax mold was just there. So the process in which this was created is another thing where they went all out on the cost, decided to do the proper way versus the cheap way. They designed it so that you had this flat surface here for your palm to rest on, so it was real smooth. Nothing digs into your hands. It just feels like a single piece all the way down to the body almost. It's very ergonomic. You see this a lot now with Music Man guitars. I think Abasi guitars now have a very similar style, fat bottom bridge like this for an ergonomic purpose. So very unique in that aspect. It was very easy to customize. One of the issues that people wanted is that they wanted it to be easy to adjust. So and by that, like, I want to be able to maybe raise or lower the action really quick, or I want to go from 9-gauge strings to 10-gauge strings and not take 3 or 4 hours to do that, to fine tune the system. So because of the locking tuners, I'm able to quickly change strings out. The bridge, I have these two posts here, these two little holes here that I can use an Allen key that comes with it to I just turn it to raise and turn it to lower the action. The bridge is designed at an angle. It's designed, first of all, for 9-gauge strings, but you can use whatever. But out of the factory, it's designed where these saddles are positioned to provide perfect intonation for 9-gauge strings. So you shouldn't have to adjust them, but if you do, there's just an Allen key, and you can push the saddles forward and backwards and then tighten the Allen key back. So it was very versatile. You don't see that very often in guitars back then. You see it a lot now, easy to adjust bridges. So let's see here. The bridge also has a very unique tremolo system, and this was something that Larry Fishman designed with the help of Ken to fix a few issues with the traditional spring tremolo system. So you have a plate here that it will pretty much it's sized to accept the tension that any particular gauge of strings would require. If that's the easiest way to put it, I guess. So you have a plate that says like 9s, plates that says 10s and 11s, for whatever gauge string you want to put. The issue to this, like I said, he didn't fix everything without creating a couple issues. The issue to this is that it did make it somewhat proprietary in that you had to have the plates for the gauge of string. So, luckily, if you had a 9 and a 10 and you had one Parker guitar and an 11, then that's all you'll ever need, because these plates should last forever as long as you know how to set it up. One of the issues with these guitars is that because of the tremolo system being so unique, it's not, when you replace strings or go from 9s to 10s, you have to do it in a certain process, which is outlined in the manual. If you don't, you have a possibility of over tightening this trim wheel, putting too much pressure on the plate, and the plate pops out and breaks through the wood right here. I've seen it on a few guitars. It's nothing, it looks catastrophic, but technically the guitar can still work with that. It just looks terrible, especially if you have this nice of a guitar. You don't want to do that. So as long as you follow the manual, you should have no problem with that. But the plate is proprietary in that, they don't make them anymore. So they are selling for about, I'd say anywhere between 100 to 150 if you needed a replacement plate. But again, you should never need one as long as as long as you set the guitar up properly and follow the instructions, which are not hard at all. But the plate, the purpose of it was that it provided a new system that was quiet. So if I use my trim arm, you don't hear the creaking of the springs. Also, it's more uniform. There's no chance of, when I push the bridge down to drop to dive bomb, it's not going to lower one side more than the other. It's more uniform. But it also allows the bridge to be floating, so I can pull it up, press it down, or I can put it in a lock position. There's this simple little switch here, which I need to adjust on mine. I just recently took the back off, but there's a switch here that you can pull down, and that puts it into a floating position, or push it up and it puts it into just a down only position. And supposedly in the manual, you can turn this enough to where it puts so much pressure on the plate to where it locks it, to where it's too hard to press it down. I would not suggest doing that. Just leave it in the down position. And if you want a fixed bridge, just take your tremolo arm off. That's the easiest way to do it. So, the bridge was one of the biggest mechanical changes and one of the biggest patents about this guitar that were unique. And ergonomically, it fixed the issue of, digging into your hand. It fixed the issue of, being able to easily adjust and go from one string gauge to the other by just popping in a new plate and, using the locking tuners to restring. And it was just, it made the guitar a little bit more quiet. There's less noise and rattling. So, and it gives you versatility like the Steinberger did with the trans trim, where you could go from floating to fixed just like that. That's pretty sweet. That was something that was very unique at the time. I don't think any other guitar had that ability to switch, at least that I can think of. I could be wrong on that. So, and then of course it gave you versatility, kind of like how the Stratocaster from the Telecaster, they wanted more pickup configurations and stuff. So they improved by adding more pickups, which didn't take away anything. That just added capability. They did the same thing by adding the piezos with the mags. This was the very first. That was the only other evolution you could do in guitars at the time, and nobody had ever done it until Parker Fly did it. So, and of course, the lightweight issue was the number one thing. Ken Parker used lightweight tone woods, which were typically not used in electric guitar manufacturing because of their stability and strength. It just wasn't there. Typically, if you did use lightweight woods, you had a really bulky, massive body because you had to have a very strong neck joint where the neck meets. In this case, because of his exoskeleton, he was able to use lightweight tone woods, which tone woods just mean woods that resonate very well. They're what guitar luthiers typically want to use, so that when you strum a guitar, it just resonates really well naturally, and it doesn't require as much amplification, I guess you can say, and that it represents every frequency evenly, not just low end or high end. Acoustic guitars are typically made out of lightweight woods that are very fragile. If you hit it, you could punch a hole through an acoustic very easily. But because of the lightweight woods and the exoskeleton, he was able to carve away so much wood to where he got these guitars down to about as low as 4.5 pounds. So from a comfortability and ergonomic standpoint, there was no other guitar like it. So that, I think, pretty much covers all the different features of the guitar. I guess I should mention that the piezo system requires a battery, obviously. So you have a 9-volt compartment here, which even was custom made. The hardware, the screws were custom made so that if you unscrew it, the screws don't fall out. They stay attached to the plate. Little details like that were really thought about when designing this guitar, because nobody likes to lose pieces. The red button allows you to use a stereo Y cable, kind of like this one here. So I can plug it in and send my acoustics out to one amp and send my magnetics out to another amp. And then I could press this button here if I want to combine it to a single output or separate it. The pots and switches are super high quality. I mean, these switches that you see here that switch between the magnetic configuration or the piezo and magnetic configuration are the same that you get on like your high-end amplifiers, like super heavy-duty metal 3-way switches. And the pots, I don't know much about pot manufacturers. I do know that these are pretty high quality. One of the issues that people have mentioned is that they are very loose. So like you'll be playing and it easily turns as you're strumming. An easy thing you can do is just put inside of this, I can't even pull it off, a rubber O-ring. You can do this with any guitar, and that way you can just press down hard and it puts tension on it and it won't spin. So yeah, that, I guess, all those changes that I just reviewed, the changes of the frets, the exoskeleton, the changes of the fretboard, the use of locking tuners, the use of a new tremolo system, the design of the guitar, the weight of the guitar, are all things that people were asking for that he was able to fix while still keeping the traditional design of a guitar to where it wasn't, you weren't losing anything other than just the plate on the tremolo system being unique. Everything else is the same. I guess you could say the frets are probably a drawback, because if you do, well, I'll point this out. I mentioned that these are glued on. One of the complaints that you'll hear people say is that the frets have a tendency of popping off. Now, I have 3 pre-refined flies that have not a single fret issue at all, or neck issue. Because they are glued on, just like with any glue, if you would apply a high heat to it, or maybe you leave it in a window and the sun is coming through the window and a sunbeam is like shining on your fret during the day and maybe you don't know it, that could loosen up the glue. Or if you leave it in your car in a hot environment, like super hot, I could see how that could possibly happen. But it's very rare to happen on the pre-refined guitars, although it is possible. I do see that happen a lot more on the guitars that were made after 2003. And I think part of that is because they refined the guitar process. They changed the process in which the glue is applied and the way that Ken had laid out to where it was done precisely and effectively. I think the changes that they made, whether they got a new formula for the glue or whether it was coming from a different manufacturer or whatever it was, we tend to see more post-2003 refined Parker flies have issues with glue, the glued-on frets coming off. And if you did lose a fret, and you completely lost it, don't know where it went, it would be maybe a little hard to find replacement frets now. There are some people on Reverb that are selling, I've seen a couple that sell spools of the Parker Fly fret wire. Some guys that used to work for the manufacturing plant that took some equipment with them. But typically, you know, if these start to raise up, you're going to note it. You're going to know it before it falls off completely. You're going to get a lot of fret buzz. So as long as you hold on to the fret, it's not very hard to clean these off and re-glue them on. It's a little tedious. You have to be patient, but it is definitely something that you could do that I think personally would be easier than having to reinsert and rehammer in a stainless steel fret in a traditional guitar with tangs, and then nipping the tangs and crown and filing. And that just sounds a lot more work than replacing a single fret that falls off. So, but yeah, like I said, all the changes that he made, that him and Larry set out to make, overall had a larger net gain on the impact of the guitar than any other guitar since this guitar was made, and up until back until the Stratocaster was made. The Stratocaster had a lot of changes like this one made that were for the better. This was the next evolution in guitars that made changes for the better without creating more issues. We're seeing guitars this day utilize the technology that Ken Parker and Larry Fishman put in the Parker Fly. You don't see them give the credit. They don't probably ever say, "Oh, I got this from the Parker guitar," but you'll find that of the first with the locking tuner, first with composite material, first with the active pickups, the piezo pickups, and first used hardened stainless steel glued on frets. This was the guitar that set the template going forward for guitar manufacturers. This revolutionized guitar manufacturing for the better, and that's why I think it's definitely the greatest guitar, one of the greatest guitars ever made. And obviously, because it's no longer around and you probably didn't know half the stuff I'm just telling you unless you're a guitar enthusiast, that's also why it's underrated, because most people don't know anything about these guitars, and those that are making the guitars now that utilize the same technology aren't given the credit where credit's due.